everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Black Tea, our series about Black women in advertising, hosted by Muse by Cleo. I'm so glad to be here today and to meet for the first time Pilar McQuirter. Hi, Pilar.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good. Saturday morning, I can't complain.
Please do tell the people what you do and where you're based.
So I work as a cultural strategy director at Mullen Lowe in Los Angeles. I'm originally from Chicago, but I just moved out here in January.
How are you liking it so far?
It's sunny. It's beautiful. It's exactly what they say, you know, I can't complain. It's a beautiful space to be, and it's so different from Chicago, which I love, so.
Okay, that's dope. So cultural strategy director, for the novice, break down how that's different from maybe just a strategy director, or how much of it is culture driven work. What's that role like?
Yeah, so I'm actually the first cultural strategy director within the Mullen Lowe network. And I think it's such a funny title because it is almost redundant. It's implied that all strategists understand culture. So what I like to say is I bring my experience in diversity, equity, and inclusion work and also brand strategy together into the role. So I think the important part about cultural strategy is that, you know, as the world is starting to change so quickly, we need to really be on top of and impulse with social movements and how they're affecting people. And when I say that, I mean, you know, as the cultural tide starts to shift, what are the demands that people are starting to have of each other and one another? And how is that ultimately going to affect how they are as consumers and also their expectations of how brands should show up, right? And then I also think it's important to have a cultural strategist in the room who's working on the work, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusion leaders across the country have talked about how difficult it is for the job to be on their shoulders, right? So who is actually in the room having the tough conversations about making the work more inclusive, or understanding how, you know, systems of inequity or oppression are kind of seeping its way into the work stream. We all kind of need to carry that burden. So the work of cultural strategy is a little bit of both. It's a little bit of brand strategy and it's a little bit of DEI. I still write briefs like every other strategist would. I still do the same sort of work stream, but my lens with which I view the world is, I think, a broader aperture on purpose.
Okay, yeah, that's so interesting. There always seems to be like a little bit of a spillover between episodes, and I was just chatting with Bianca Reed, and she was saying that DEI, you know, it traditionally lives in the HR space, but there needs to be DEI in creative and in strategy and in this and that. And I think that's where the I really comes in, right? And that's how you make sure that the work that actually comes out of it, you know, keeps that cycle going. So that's really awesome and interesting. How did you find your way into advertising in the first place?
I got into advertising through the MAPE program, so the Multicultural Advertising Internship Program. It's hosted by the 4As, and I was a junior in college, and I wanted to join an advertising practicum class because all of my friends were taking it, and it seemed fun, and they needed somebody. My major in concentration was in public relations, and they needed somebody with a PR lens. And then I was like, wait, this is way more fun. And so in the midst of that class, I actually applied to the MAPE program. I got in, and then my first internship in advertising was at Ogilvy and Mather in New York.
Oh, wow.
I know.
Good. That's a really good score. And were you always in strategy once you got into advertising?
When I started, I actually started an account. It was recommended because I was coming from outside of the industry, right? So they said, if you start an account, you'll kind of get an overview of all of the disciplines and you'll be able to kind of pick the one that you feel is best for you. So I started an account, but very quickly realized I love strategy the most.
Why?
Because you get to be curious, and I'm nosy, and I feel like it's important for people to kind of like constantly stay sharp, and strategists always get asked very tough and interesting questions that they have to solve and distill for everybody. And so I was always that person that was kind of like, oh, well, look at our competitors doing. Oh, well, why can't we do this on social? Or look what's coming up next. And, you know, that is the work of a strategist. And in so many ways, account people do help with competitive work and trend work, but I wanted that to be 100% of what I did. So.
Well, that's amazing. And so a lot of the work that you do has a lot to do, obviously, with culture and with representation in the work. How do you feel like your experience, your particular experience as a Black woman has factored into your work?
You know, I think it's interesting because Black women kind of sit at this intersectional identity. So someone asked me, they were like, is it difficult for you at all to like work on things that are so closely personal to you and your livelihood, right? And I was like, no, because I can't not see the world this way, right? You can't unsee it. So I think the cool thing about being a Black woman in the room is that inherently you are always looking up, down, left, right. I always like to say, actually, the better way to answer this question is the conversation I have with Savani. So she and I always like love to say that Black women make the best strategists. And that's because Black women inherently, as a Black person and as a woman, you're always looking around you. Your head is always on a swivel, right? As you move through the world. And that's for your own safety, but that's also for you to find the best opportunity in life. And so when you have that sort of lens, you're able to kind of identify who's missing, who should be there, who's a better cultural fit for the work. It's kind of inherent and organic. And that's like a skill that you use to navigate through life, but it's also a skill you can use to sharpen the creative perspective of work too. So.
Have there been any reactions to your Black womanness in the industry that sort of rubbed you the wrong way or caused you to kind of step back as a challenge? And if so, how did you deal with that?
Yeah, man. I mean,
I know it's hard to narrow it down to a
yeah, one is hard to pick, but I think what I will say is, you know, there was an experience that I had where I was trying to advocate for a client to define social purpose work and really push themselves to kind of figure out and name how they were going to continue to show up for the Black community. And I had to kind of shoulder that work stream all on my own. And I had a meeting with a person and they were like, you know, I set up this meeting with you, you know, to kind of check in, because when you started here, you were really positive and you were really bubbly. And I don't know what it's been lately, but I've just about had it with the strategy team. And they said, you know, they basically gaslit me for being frustrated because I was under supported in this project work stream. Mm-hmm. The way they articulated it was that I had an attitude problem and that, you know, I don't know what's gotten into you lately, if you're stressed and it was such a very weird way for somebody who should have been more of a support system for me to come to me and check in, right? It was a very passive aggressive way of going about it. Because I'm in a leadership position, I have the privilege and the opportunity to be like, actually, you know, here's what's happening. And so the way I checked the person was essentially to say, you know, I'm sorry to hear that it's been so difficult for you to work with me. That's not my intention at all. Let me just walk you through my perspective and my experience up until this point and some of the hurdles along the way that I could have used support, because that's what this is coming down to, and kind of had to reframe the entire problem. I've had a lot of people come to me with personal grievances that are really professional riffs, right? So I think the biggest part as a Black woman is that oftentimes people will take your demeanor as a personal attack, when really I'm just trying to get this work done. And I ended the conversation by saying, at the end of the day, like, if I'm upset about something, if I'm not seeming like myself, you have to know 3 things about me. I love my job, I love working with people, and I love making creative work. And if I can't do any of those 3 things, then I'm going to be upset. And it has nothing to do with you. I'm just disappointed that I can't make the best work in the best way possible, period. Like, this is not about you. This is very much about the work. And always having to reframe things, because for some reason, it always gets personal too soon. And I'm like, that's not what this is. I have friends and we fight, but it's not here. It's not now. It's not with you.
Right. Yeah. You don't get that energy from me. That
Right.
makes a lot of sense. I think that's a really clear way to put it. It is, and to your point, it definitely helps to be in a position to where you can have those conversations. My heart goes out to the newbies starting out that have, that experience and don't really have the authority to push back the way that they want to. I know that that was an experience that I, had at my earlier agencies when, when you're the only one who looks like you in the department, it's tough uh, to have to swim through people's biases to do your job. So that is always going to be tricky. What, if any, pointers would you give out to someone who maybe is a little too junior or too green to sort of reframe the problem and say, here's what we're talking about now? Or
Yeah.
would you or would you argue that there is, there's no being too junior to do that?
There's no being too junior. I've always been told that. There's no being too junior. You cannot get punished for, I always like to say, skipping a few grades, right? When you're a little bit more advanced than your level. So take that out of the equation. What I will say is that you have to find your people first and foremost, right? And so the thing that helped me the most as a junior was to find somebody that I could trust and confide in to at least talk through the root of what I'm experiencing. Because that's the first part, right? Oftentimes when you experience, I like to call it lowercase r racism, because what it really is like gaslighting, microaggressing, and you don't really know how to name it. So you need to find your people that you can talk to about it, and people beyond the person who's in control of your job, right? Somebody who's not in a position of power, somebody who is a confidant that you can trust. And that's hard, right? But you're gonna need your people, because you're gonna need somebody to go back to. And now I'm not talking about shit talking, I'm talking about somebody who you can work through and talk through the experience with, so you can get prepared to talk to somebody up front. The other thing that I would say is the advice that my mom always gave me. And she said, after this situation, actually, she told me, she was like, Pilar, why would you ever expect them to advocate for you? Mm-hmm. She was like, you cannot assume that anybody will say your name in a room. It is your job to make sure that they do not erase you. That is your job, right? So you can't complain until you've advocated for what you need, and then somebody says no, right? Until that point, you have no right to complain. So that's why I say it's important to find your people, because you can get to the root of what you actually need out of a situation. And then you can come to the conversation constructively and say, hey, here's what I actually need to be successful, or here's what I need to make this working relationship better. And then it's a discussion, right? Then it's not, you hurt my feelings because of this. That may be true, but you can't rely on them to process feelings, but you can they can process how to do their job better. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. That is a word that I wish I had 6 to 8 years ago.
Shout out to Mama, Wendy Williams, no relation. OG, she totally, she's worked in tech for over 20 years. Yeah. She's a Black woman, so she's seen a thing or two, and she tells me all the time. It's great.
Amazing. So what is one of your hopes for the future of advertising?
I think one of my hopes for the future of advertising is for people to realize that there is no shortage of resources out there, okay? We operate so much in advertising, and even brands operate in such a scarcity mindset that it limits the scope of what is possible for creative ideas, right? So I always feel like there is a way to get things done. And we often limit ourselves in terms of quite literally scope, but then also we kill things before they get out the door. And I think, it's important for brands to start to realize the ways in which they can show up in community that decenters their product and their good, and also just centers people. And it's important for agencies to do that in practice as well. Because I think at the end of the day, we are starting to get such a really smart consumer. Selling our product is not going to be, the key differentiator anymore. It's really going to be about how do you show up when I need you the most? Because quite frankly, people are organizing across the world in such a way that requires resources and requires sort of support. And I think that that's not going to come in the way of, an ad. It's going to come by way of Calm sponsoring Naomi Osaka's Fine for mental health, right? So that is the best sponsorship that I've seen in years, right? So the more brands can get smart fast and realize that, like, hey, we actually have enough right now to be able to support people beyond product. Why don't we do that so that when they need a product, we're also there. And I think they'll need advertisers to start to realize that, like, brand purpose is a lot deeper than product. And I think it's a mindset shift, but I think the generations after us will start to approach this work in that way that's like so creatively cutting edge and off the bounds of traditional billboards and traditional banners, that they'll start to think about showing up in community in a way that's actually useful and effective, right? If we're taking up this much space, then what are we even doing or saying with it? That's going to be the expectation, I think, in the future. And I hope we can start to figure out how best to position ourselves to show up better for people.
Y'all, Pilar is not just giving you the tea, she's giving you the tea bag so you can brew your own tea. And I feel like you should have to pay her to watch this episode, because that felt like some consulting that these people are getting for free. So you're welcome for that. Wow. So, okay, you have done work with the Black Catalog, Black at Work. You're on the board of Ad Color. You are putting a lot out there in addition to just the role that you do in service of making the work more inclusive. That's a lot of output. What are your inputs that are keeping you inspired in those areas? Are there any sort of, like, just Black as fuck kind of inputs that are keeping you feeling inspired? Are there things that you're listening to? What is going in?
Yeah, so not enough, first of all, let's be clear. So I think I could always be better about pouring into my own cup. I think there are a couple things that inspire me. I just picked up Miriam Kaba's We Do This Till We Free Us, a book on abolition, which is really cool. So I think about, I always question, like, oh, do I want to go to grad school to learn about organizational change? And I was like, or I could just, like, read a book on abolition, and that does the trick, right? So I like to look outside of the industry to see how systems are changing and moving, and learn from that. I'm super inspired by unconventional brand building. I would say my favorite person in the world right now is Tracy Ellis Ross, and also Solange. Tracy and how she promotes pattern is absolutely amazing. But then Solange's work with, like, slowly but surely growing and building Saint Huron to be a creative services agency, right? That just centers Black people and Black stories so organically, is beautiful. And then I also say my friends. So I have friends around me that are building their own brands and businesses. And we're starting to get to this space of, like, hey, I know you do brand strategy. Can I, like, pay you to consult? And I'm like, girl, no, like, we're building everyone around us. So I think that is where I feel most creatively fulfilled, and, like, taking what I've learned in such a traditional space and then just applying it to, like, casual acquaintances and friends. That's such a fun way to brainstorm and think about strategy differently.
Yeah. And then to all the friends out there, that's how you friend, okay? You say, hey, can I pay you for this? And then we say, no, I got you.
Yeah,
Totally
and to be clear,
not the other way.
that happened. And then I was like, actually, you know what would be better payment is I want to build this brand and I care about building your brand so much. I want equity. I don't want you to pay me. I
Yeah.
will help you get money and we will both eat off that alone. And at that point, it's such a mutual shared investment. I have incentive and I have motivation. They have incentive and they have motivation. And so holding ourselves accountable is a lot easier. And it's not so transactional.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful.
Okay, I want to give you a chance to sort of, I mean, you're a boss, but so I want you to talk about that and brag on a piece of work that you are really proud of. Try to pick a fave.
A piece of work. So speaking of working with friends, the last project I did before I left Chicago was with a collective called Cold Chillin'. It's run by Sylvia and Pharaoh. And the two of them tapped me to help them build out this collaboration with Jack Daniels and Jack Honey. It was before I had the job now, but I took a month off between my jobs, which is beautiful. So I had some time and we worked to launch a fashion collection for Jack Honey and Jack Apple. And we partnered with Sheila Rashid. We also partnered with Brooklyn Circus and they made custom merchandise. And then we also created a grant program for Jack Daniels, a fashion grant program. So up and coming designers could then apply for it. So Jack Daniels matched the sales. All of the sales went back to the artist. It felt like such an equitable campaign where Jack was like, hey, I'll pay you, fashion designer, to design these clothes and you can make money off of the clothes and we'll match the money you make and give back. Like it checked all of my boxes. It was such a beautiful experience. And that's what I'm talking about. I'm like, okay, first of all, this is what the people want. Okay, so let's do that and make sure more people can do it. And so, yeah, I'm really excited about the program. I think that it has so much potential. It's sold out in so many ways. And so, yeah, and it was beautiful because, you know, Pharaoh and Sylvia and I are friends. So it was also just like, yeah, let's just build this thing. And it was, you know, the three of us, and we hired Kevin O to do production, and it was beautiful. It was just us being like, oh, wow, we actually have the network to be able to like do this ourselves now. And it felt like it was the first project that I think I was like, oh, wow, okay, this is the beginning of something really cool. And yeah, I'm really proud of it because it just gave back in such an organic way and it didn't feel forced or overly branded. It was just a beautiful story.
Wow, that's really great. I can't wait to take a look at some of that work. It has been, I feel like the time has flown by. It has been so incredible talking to you, Pilar, and learning from you. Honestly, I feel like I'm sitting crisscross applesauce right now, just listening to everything that you're saying. So I just want to say thank you so much for spending time on Black Tea. And everyone watching, thank you so much for watching. Please go to musebycleo.com/Black Tea to keep watching and sharing these episodes. And we will talk to y'all next time. Bye.